Well, hopefully everybody feels they got what they paid for.
Probably not.
I can't even I heard it there a little bit actually. I think you had the cadence correct. As we see Saint opening with inbox, so we do catch this game right from the start. And this is between, as you see on the lower left of the screen, Ed Liebfried, very long time Scrabble player who I think had a couple years hiatus from Scrabble in the last couple years, taking a Scrabatical, as I've heard said. And versus Saint Vesdapunt, another very strong expert player. So it should be a good tactical matchup here between these two.
Saint is a really exciting player. I know that Ed is very solid. I've played him many times. There was there was one time I played Ed where I made a terrible mistake. Actually, two terrible mistakes. I think the first thing I did was I hooked a blank onto the word shakeout, which I was really proud of finding. The word shakeout, and I hooked a blank, and I then put an O and an L. So I was trying to play SOL and shakeouts. But as mentioned earlier, in live play, you actually, excuse me, you have to circle the blank that you're playing, and sometimes a letter in the word you're playing, you'll get confused with that letter, and you'll circle the wrong letter, and that leads to some really annoying losses of turns. And in this particular instance, I played LOL and shakeoutle,
Oh
shakeout,
no.
and
Oh
lost my
no.
turn in a ridiculous fashion. This would never happen online, so that for people that are really happy playing online rather than in tournaments because of some silly rules, that's one of those rules that is quite silly. It doesn't mean you should make the mistake of playing shakeoutle and LOL, but yeah, it was very embarrassing. I lost my turn, and then after, I think the next turn, I tried to play Palooza, which is also not a word.
Yes, and
And
Lollapalooza.
yeah, and it didn't go well, let's just say. So Ed has had his way against me. Saint has had his way against me as well. Um, I think we're gonna see an exciting matchup here. And we
Wow, we
see the play of
see.
No
I
Moy.
I was going to ask you, Josh, whether we thought we would see Ed make a play. It does look like most of his quote unquote best equity plays, which we'll talk about what that means in a second, expose a triple word score to Saint.
Oh my god, look at this.
Wow. Okay,
Okay.
so there is a crazy. I see at least one amazing bingo here through the E of reinfuse. Whether there's more than that out there, I'm not sure. I do see that there is a bingo, and it looks like the only bingo available is through the E.
Oh,
Okay, but quickly, Ed plays Pow to cover up his own spot, and ultimately, that's a really nice play. If you're gonna
extremely strong play,
not
yeah.
see that bingo, it's not even that big of a miss. It does a lot of good things. Pow, but yeah, you're seeing in the chat, two penny was available on that Pow turn through the E of reinfuse. Would have been a beautiful, beautiful play, but Pow still scores 45 points, leaves the blank behind, and blocks that I in the triple lane. So a lot of good things that it does as well.
Okay, and I'm gonna try my best here, Happy Wanderer. Um, and as you can see, there's a 6 vowel rack on Saint's rack here, and what a terrible draw for Saint here. He's not going to be able to use that triple spot next to reinfuse for many points, and he might have to exchange here. This is a terrible draw.
That's pretty good too. I mean, this is the impressions, the budget version we're getting our money's worth, Josh. I'm sorry.
Oh
I
no,
hope you're okay with that.
I wouldn't pay. I wouldn't pay. I
We
wouldn't
can
pay
we
for
can take those out anytime if you want. Of course, they're just for fun. Um,
it.
but
But I'm
Josh
having
doing a
fun. I'm
great
having
job.
fun.
Max says nicely done too.
All right, seal of approval. Okay, so area was played. I don't know about
Yeah,
that.
that's brutal. That rack. So, okay. So Saint playing area with a rack of 6 vowels and only one consonant. Um, Josh, you're saying you're not sure about that one. I assume you're thinking maybe an exchange is warranted there over playing. Is that your thought?
Yeah, I'd honestly play ED, WOE, and ID over the play of area because that scores 24 points rather than 8 points, but that also leaves you with the 4 A's. But no, I really think maybe an exchange there was warranted. You're only getting rid of 2 of your 4 A's. That means you're still keeping duplicates on your rack. 3 vowels, 1 consonant. Very bad balance. But it's really hard in those positions. Like, do I really have to exchange? Look how many scoring opportunities on the board.
Totally. Look how many triple word scores are
It's just
accessible, right? They're the top middle triple, the lower middle triple, the triple word score under the eye of Nomoi. There's 3 of them open, and you can't do anything really in any spot that's palatable. So it hurts in these situations when your tiles are so bad that really your best play is nevertheless to exchange. And we see unspent go down for Ed. So Ed jumps right back into the lead with a bingo of his own. Both players have bingoed once here in the early going. Reinfused for Saint and unspent for Ed.
I can't really do a saint. I can tell. Okay, I'll tell one story about Saint that I've already told on stream, but hopefully not so many people have heard it. Um, so Saint, whose real name is Norases Vesdapunt, he's, like I said, he's a really exciting player. He's very hyperactive in tournaments, and it's actually kind of off-putting when you're playing against him. He might distract you. He's done a few things that have bothered me a little bit, but overall, it's really fun to play against him. I think he plays pretty aggressively. And one time, I think in that same California Open tournament, I tied my game against a player that wasn't Saint, and after games are over, you often like go around and you ask people, like usually the same people, how their game went, and you talk about it, and everybody's just like, "Oh, I won or I lost," and then I was like, "Well, actually, I tied," and like Saint just came out of nowhere. He's like, "You tie? I tie." And and
Nice. Yeah, see,
he didn't actually tie, but he is Thai.
he is a
So he's
Thai
from
from Thailand. Yeah, of course.
it's just like
Very
Jesus.
nice. A number of crazy plays just hit the board here during that story too.
Oh, I didn't even see Zloty.
Yeah, so yeah, Zloty would hit the board. Adlands as a response by Saint, a very, very nice bingo. Although I have to point out that on this play of Adlands, he actually had the bingo of sandaled through the
Ooh.
E, the first E of reinfuses, making the word all AAL and ED through that top E of reinfuses, which scored roughly as well as Adlands, but didn't open up yet another set of triple word scores for his opponent Ed to use. So potentially a slight positional improvement there. But just going back to Ed's previous play of Zloty, I mean, that is just a tremendous play and find in that spot. There was an idea that he could have used his J and Z at once by playing Jeesley through the E of Aesia, a very strange word. I'll just define that in the chat so you guys can
That's
see what
still
I'm
good?
talking about. On that play of Zloty, he
I
had this
didn't think that was
word.
still good.
What's that? I'm
I
sorry.
didn't think that was still a word. Wow.
Oh,
Okay, that's 50 points.
I think they added, or they got rid of at least one form of word like that. But yeah, it is very strange word. You see, oh, Jeeslier was. That's it. That's what.
Okay.
Yeah, it's not an adjective, I guess. Okay, so Jiggle is played there by Ed. That's an interesting choice. He definitely had places to play his J for slightly more points. But Jiggle looks like a pretty good play. The
And those
spot that he could
G's.
have played his J was just on top of Zloty. He could have played Ahi there with the J in that
Oh,
spot,
yeah.
where you
Keeping
know
2 G's, Will. I mean, come on.
that's true. That's true. 2 Gs are pretty bad. Yeah, I think Jiggle may have some advantage over that for that reason. So close plays, hard to find fault with Jiggle. And very, very quickly, Saint responds with Fat, which looks like by far his best option through the A of Adlands. He had a very, very consonant-heavy rack. He was able to score 36 points and keep his lone vowel for next turn. So pretty high-level play being showcased here. Though little tiny nuances one way or another, a couple of plays. I didn't even finish my comment on Nomoi, where I was going to try to ask you whether you thought that play was warranted on that turn so early in the game. I was going to talk about equity and what that means.
I mean, it's for content, right? So I would say
Yeah.
yes. I would have played Moon. Oh wait, Ob isn't good. No, yeah, actually
Yeah,
seems
there were
fine.
really in this NWL game, there were almost no plays that were evaluated highly on equity that didn't open the triple lane up. That was the crazy thing about that Nomoi turn.
All right, do we have
Um,
to explain equity now?
yeah, I'll just real quick, when we say equity in Scrabble, all we're referring to is we're trying to assign a value to the what is a play worth, and how you make that value is not only the score of the play that you're making, but also the letters that you leave behind for next turn. So without even thinking about any considerations about, does this open the board, does this close the board, does this give my opponent a huge scoring play, we try to give a number to every candidate play that simply represents how many points does it score and how good are the letters that it leaves behind. So when you hear equity of a play, that's what we mean. It's very much divorced from whether the play is actually a good strategic play or not. So we do see weight go down for Ed, and this is a really back and forth game here. Both
Yeah,
players are struggling.
I'm liking the way Ed is playing this. He's maximizing his score. There wasn't really much there to leave much better. The BIE leave is obviously not ideal, but I think scoring there, opening another spot, keeping areas of the board open, because he is down. I would say he's down a tempo. You can see he's up by 2 points, but Saint's turn, and usually you'd have to be up by like maybe 10, 15 points for the tempo in Scrabble to basically cancel itself out. So even if the game is tied, whose ever turn it is usually has an advantage, notwithstanding the rack that they have, obviously.
Yeah,
But
the thing about that is that Saint, again, it is one of these situations where he's going to have a hard time. He can't really hit the Y of Zloty or the I of Nomoi with a good play. He doesn't have the right letters to hit either of those letters very hard. And I was
ooh,
wondering if he was going to play Vum here. And Josh, take us
interesting.
through this play. This is a great play.
It's a setup. Sorry for the sound there.
That's right.
Um, I'm thinking of making an emote about setups. I'm
You
not really
should. You
sure.
totally should.
So the thing that Vum does is it sets up the O hook for ovum, a word we all know. And basically, Saint is just hoping that his opponent doesn't have one of the two other remaining O's, so that he can then use the spot for a lot of points. And it's really hard to block the setup if you don't have an O, because that V just cuts the board in two. You'd have to play through the V, giving back other scoring opportunities if you don't have an O. So I really like that play, despite it keeping the G. It's a nice gambit, I would say. I would call it a gambit. Would you call it a gambit, Will?
This is as close as Scrabble gets to what chess players enjoy as gambits, right? These really really outside the box ideas that you come across that sort of turn the game into will you figure out what I'm trying for here, or will I get this great idea that I have that's really outside the box? And Vum setting up the ovum hook is exactly like that. And I do see there is some disagreement in the chat about whether that's a risk worth taking with two more O's unseen. And Vum is definitely, this O Vum hook is one that Ed absolutely will immediately think of when he sees Vum.
Mhm.
I know these words are a little obscure if you're, just stumbling across and imagining like, wow, how do these players know that? right? But if you play enough at this level, at the level that Saint and Ed have been playing at for years, you're going to see Ovum, you're going to see Vum hit the board many, many, many times. So really, it's not so much a hidden trick as it is a what are you going to do about this type of thing, right? It's
Exactly.
right out there in the open. When you play Vum in that spot, you almost know for sure. If your opponent plays that against you in that spot, you know they have an O almost every time. And you're basically daring your opponent to do something about it. And as Josh alluded to, it's not that hard. It's not that easy, I should say, to do that because of the V and the no two-letter words that you can form with it.
And
So.
as Binak mentions in chat, your opponent always has an O. That's actually my number one go-to Scrabble rule of thumb. And I would probably hate to play the word vum because I know that if I'm trying to make a play that involves my opponent not having an O, it will never work out. My opponent will always have the O. That's just my rule of thumb. You think, okay, there are only 8 O's in the game of Scrabble, 9 I's, 9 A's, 12 E's. I mean, it's much more likely to have an A or an I, but no. You should honestly, you should never play the play of vum. It worked out here. I don't know how it worked out, but yeah, that's my suggestion. No, it was a great play. But I also see in the chat, I also see in the chat, I rear could have been played on the burr turn. What else is going on? Redeemed cat cam. That's not happening.
Yeah, there's some channel point rewards that you're accustomed to see. Conrad, I have no idea why that's happening. I don't think there's anything wrong in the word vum. So yeah, not sure why that's happening. We'll try to fix that definition bot thing. But wow. Okay, so we've seen a few plays, right? So Ed had some duplicate tiles on his rack. He played EF under Nomoi for 36. Saint cashed his O hook right away, which I think is a good idea, given that Ed could have had another one. And he scored quite well with it. Then Ed has more duplicated tile problems and plays Burr under Aecia. And Saint responding with a very, very nice overlapping play, taking a pretty solid lead here. So Saint, with that gamble of Ovum, he's been able to score in the 30s on his 2 subsequent turns, whereas Ed did score 36 with EF, but he fell behind with that bad draw.
And look
afterwards.
at the time. Look at the time.
It is a huge time edge for Saint. You can see the time just dipping into the sub 3-minute mark. That is why you see Ed's time go down into that yellow color. And you'll see it continue to move up the color scale towards red as he gets in major time trouble. He had a beautiful play there, I was going to point out, of through the D of Adlands. He could have played Heady there, which would have been an insane play. Amazingly,
That's
that
so
play
nice.
would not have hit any bonus squares at all. But because of the overlaps that it would have formed with HI,
right?
PEG, HAG, and TYE tie, it would have scored, according to this, 36 points in that spot. I don't know how you just counted that in your head. I would have taken
I didn't
to count that.
I didn't, obviously.
Well, you got pretty close. I wouldn't have. It's amazing.
I see. I didn't count the D for some reason. Also mentioned by Todovsky in chat. Shout out to Todovsky. Who streams Shogi Scrabble, all sorts of things, and is starting to get into tournament Scrabble. So yeah, shout out to Todovsky. There was a really good comment by him saying the reason that Vum is such a good play is that there are already so many triple words open. So I mean, we don't have to go back, but before the play of Vum, that triple on the bottom row is open, the triple under the I in Nomoi, the triple to the Y in Zloty. There's so many openings that basically what you just want to do is suit yourself. Like try to make a play that helps you the most.
Great point. Yeah, it's a really.
And I really think that Vum was no jokes. Like it was a really good play.
Yeah, stylistically, that is a play that incurs a level of risk that, depending on what you're comfortable with as a player, you might not be comfortable with a play like Vum. I myself I do feel comfortable making plays like that, but certainly I do try to take into account what was my opponent's previous play. That's a really, really huge clue to whether or not they have an O as well. Sometimes you can just tell by the play that your opponent made that they couldn't have had a certain tile, or else they would have played something else that would have been much better. That's what we call inference, where you use your opponent's play as a clue to help you make better decisions with your own tiles. And that is a really, really difficult skill. It's one that in Scrabble, it's hard enough just to see the words on your rack. It's hard enough just to see the spots on the board where you can play them. Then you add in this other factor of every single play that your opponent makes, at least that isn't a bingo, right? If your opponent plays all of their letters, you can't really know very much about what they draw out of the bag, except for your tracking. But any opponent's play that doesn't use all their letters is sort of a clue. It can be a clue to help you understand what did they keep left on their rack. And that can really help make decisions like VUM much more palatable to you. So that could have been in Saint's thinking there too. But this, wow, okay, so this is really tricky as we actually
This is a really tricky
zoom
spot.
this position. Yeah,
And
so
we see Saint Monday in chat. Brian Bowman said he beat Dr. Bing. I think they both scored over 500.
oh my
So
god.
Dave lost again. Just you can always check the standings. I think someone in chat can send a link, but that would have been a game to see, unfortunately. Yeah, so duo comes down. This is a really, really tough spot because not only is there a blank lurking, there's a Q lurking, and you're just as likely to draw the Q as you are the blank. So parting with your U, not really the most intuitive thing, but it seems to have worked out here.
And a Q, oh man, so that was, wow, that was so crazy because so Saint playing duo for as high of a score as he can get. Ed has the Q on his rack, but instead he jumps for a little bit of a higher score by dumping his H. But I think I would have liked to see him play that Q while he had some decent places to do so on that turn. By
Yeah.
keeping it behind on his rack, he had a good place to play Chi alongside Jiggle for 28 points if he wanted to, or if he wanted to keep his eye, which maybe if he had identified that keeping the eye maybe increased his chances of drawing a 7-letter bingo or an 8-letter bingo. If he had done that calculation, maybe he could have kept his eye instead and simply played his Q on top of the eye of inbox for 22. But instead, he keeps it behind, and I think he'll regret that because there isn't much help coming for you. For that Q, there are no U's left, and really only the blank is going to help him deploy that Q for any more points than he could have gotten. So let's see how this turns out. Saint certainly seems to have the edge. He makes a nice play blocking that bottom of the board.
Yeah,
with
definitely.
Eek. So we got a follow also from Krister Greer. Thank you very much. Welcome aboard. Hope you're enjoying the broadcast. We're in the tail end here of round 3 in the NWL division between Saint Vesdapunt and Ed Liebfried, and it certainly looks like Saint has a good situation. Josh, what are you thinking going into this end game here with the
Yeah, it was
bag empty?
definitely. I think, like you said, for Ed, it was definitely the wrong choice of sequence to play the H before the Q. In this situation, he had to empty the bag by playing his Q, and look at that beautiful find to win the game for Saint. He drew the blank. It was
Wow.
really, really great find there,
Was that
Volutins.
the only? That's tremendous. Volutin. Yeah, the only bingo available through the end of Adlands, and Saint spots it to go ahead at the very end of the game with that S hooking onto Eek to make Seek. That is just a lovely play, and what an interesting back and forth game there by these two players. That was a treat to watch. I'm trying to think where, if we were to go back and look at this game, which positions would we even want to go in more in depth? There were a lot that I would think to look at here. Do you have any that are on your mind that we should take a deeper dive into?
I mean, I think it really all came down to the first play of No Moy. plural of
Yeah, that
nomos.
was an interesting one for
I think
sure.
that was really prone to leading to the sort of game we witnessed where it's just back and forth and scoring spots galore, bingos. I mean, these are nice games. These are nice games for viewers. So I think that that first play right after inbox um, is definitely a good one to look at. Um, because yeah, you have the choice. Like you don't have to open that huge spot, but nothing even seems to come close in terms of as we mentioned equity.
So
So
just getting word that perhaps behind the scenes there may be an issue or two tweak to make to the Woogles servers that are hosting this tournament. So we've got plenty of cool games to look at while we wait for those fixes to be made. And it shouldn't take much more, I think, than a minute or two, a few minutes. So why don't we first, maybe we can just take a closer look at some of these plays using the analysis board. And then we did get word that there was an amazing game between Brian Bowman and Dave Wiegand, which we can cut to as well if we have time to do so.
yeah, let's look at that first play. So right after inbox.
Yeah. So here's what if you yeah, Josh, talk us through this.
So yeah, right after inbox, we see. Let me examine it myself. We see the rack of three O's and two N's. So you definitely want to get rid of two of those O's and one of those N's. Um, There are a decent amount of options, but playing NOMOI, that's really the best option to get rid of as many tiles as possible because it scores more than anything else. It's 21 points. Um, you can score 20 with mono or moon in the same spot, but those have problems of their own and they are vowel heavy. Normally in Scrabble, you don't want to keep more vowels than you keep consonants. Even keeping one vowel, one consonant, it's not as good as you would like. You really want to keep a three consonant to two vowel ratio as much as possible. But when you're stuck with four vowels, limited options after the first play, keeping the O and the N, just like Ed did, is probably the best bet for you. And it is quite an aggressive play. No more. It opens a huge spot. You're already down. Inbox scored 44 points. That's a nice opening play. But I think I really do like the idea behind Nomoy. It's just like, okay, I need to score. I need to get ahead somehow. So sure, I'm opening this big spot, but I'm keeping the best leave I can think of. And hopefully by next turn I'll be able to get something down or build towards a bingo. So I think I like the choice of Nomoy. You can also play Onion underneath inbox, making BO, ON, and XI. That is less dangerous than Nomoi, and it does leave a big lane to hook with onions, but it is less dangerous and it keeps the M. The problem with onion is I would make that play if I wasn't behind already by 44 points. I think making the play of Nomoi was correct here. What do you think, Will?
It's just so counterintuitive, right? We're taught from an early point in our Scrabble career that don't open a triple if you don't have to, right? But the real key to this position is simply that after the play of inbox, there's basically no way you can avoid placing some kind of letter on top of that X, right? So the X playing parallel, making something alongside the X is easily the best way that you can score in the 20-point range here. And you have these three O's that make it so difficult. The three O's and two N's make it so difficult to play something that plays parallel to that X that doesn't open something huge in the triple lane. All of the options that Josh just talked us through have some degree of risk, right? There's almost no way to make a play that both resolves your issue with the three O's and two N's and avoids opening something nice for your opponent. So if you're going to do a play in that spot, it could be the case that playing something like Nomoy is no riskier than many of the other options in that spot. So it's kind of counterintuitive in that way. I think for me, I still would have wanted to play something a little bit more careful. I probably would have played here. And I don't really have a great reason for that other than just not wanting to play mono, even at the risk of the Mooney hook. I think I would rather not make such an easy re-paralleling play with mono that just lets you really hammer this 3-letter spot so hard if you have high scoring letters. And if you do play Moon and your opponent does not have an S or Y, they're going to struggle terribly to score along that triple lane. Whereas after Nomoi, there are many, many things that your opponent can have that are clunky, really high scoring consonants, heavy consonant racks, that putting that I out into space turns into a really heavy hitting play. So this is definitely, I don't consider my advice here to be gospel. This is a really
Same.
nuanced play. And,
Very much.
if people are hearing our recommendations and still feeling they would prefer onion or mono or even something even more careful, not going to disagree with you.
I might have played Onion myself. And the thing is, if you're relatively new to the game of Scrabble, um, it's really a question of balancing when you're looking at plays like these, especially. It's balancing a ton of factors. How often do I bingo next turn? How often does my opponent bingo next turn? How much do I score on average around? How much do they score? What spots am I opening up? How defensive is my play? There's so many factors to consider, and most of it you have to leave up to your intuition. The play of Nomoi, what does it do? It increases your opponent's score by a ton. It increases your opponent's bingoing chances by a little bit. It increases your scoring chances by a ton, and your bingo chances by a decent amount over Moon, I would say.
For sure.
So you're just basically balancing all these factors together. It's like, okay, so what do I do? I mean, and then you do something because it's a very nuanced position. Um, Another thing to mention about Nomoi is, let's say they hit the triple. It's actually maybe even likelier that they don't play to the triple, that they play above Ox. They make something like we saw Pow played right after.
Yeah, for
Um,
45
and
points.
that's a ton of points, so that might happen, and that's kinda bad for you. I'll give you that, like, it blocks the eye partially, um, and it scores a ton of points without giving much back. But what if they hit the eye? If they hit the eye, you can play on row 6. You have the O for "Oh no," and you might draw a letter to hook Ox, and you might score a decent amount, 30 points. So it's really, I don't know. I really don't know what I would have played there, but I like the idea of Nomoi. I like Moon. I like Onion. It's really a question of what are you doing and how does that translate into the play you're making? What are you trying to do? What are you trying to achieve? Um, and yeah, that's Scrabble in a nutshell.
And the other thing is we hear these axioms, or if you start playing Scrabble, you'll get advice about different ideas that you should carry with you on every turn. And as I was saying before, one thing that you're going to hear all the time is don't open big scoring spots if you don't have to, right? Um, and in this situation, it doesn't necessarily feel like you have to, but all the concerns that Josh is saying, you all these rules that you have in Scrabble are almost made to be broken, right? There is no axiom in Scrabble that you can just blindly follow on every turn. You're always weighing certain things against other things, and it is this kind of meshwork of all the different axioms and lessons that you've learned that you have to apply in different measure depending on the situation. So I think we're in agreement that on this turn, the idea of playing something in this spot that opens access to a triple word score is probably the best way to go. And the only question is to balance that precise amount of risk um, with the upside that you get from bingoing more often by shedding some of these O's and N's, things like that.
Yeah, and it's not only just next turn. It's like how many no, what's gonna happen in 2 turns? What's
It
gonna happen in
does
3 turns?
reverberate, yeah. So
And
maybe should we also look at some other? There were other positions that we can
yeah.
delve into here.
Yeah, I mean, I could go on and on in this position, but
Yeah,
let's
there's a lot. Yeah, there's totally a lot.
the
It
2
was
penny.
pointed out on this unspent position that potentially unsilent through the eye of Nomoi, making POWs would have been a
Oh,
really,
yeah,
really
that's
cool
better.
idea. It scores a few more points. Unspent does have a slight advantage of covering up this really big scoring spot where you
Yeah.
could imagine a tile like the Y, the W, the H, not the Z in this dictionary, but a lot of heavy tiles can play there. So unspent does have that advantage, but unsilent scores 4 more points, and it does block another triple word score there. But maybe we should talk a little bit about this VUM play, because that was just such a, like, this was a really, inflection point style play of the
Yeah,
game, right?
absolutely. And
Um,
it's typical for Saint to make these sorts of plays. He's an aggressive player. He really likes to create opportunities for himself, as we saw with Dave as well in the last game. And it didn't work out for Dave, but here I can say it worked out pretty decently for Saint.
so you
Um,
can see, yeah, just look at these two. There's only two O's left. So if there were way more than that, you would start to feel for each successive O that's still left to play, VUM becomes a more and more and more dangerous choice, right? But there's only two. So the odds of catching your opponent without one are pretty good. They're not perfect. You can easily regret a play like VUM when your opponent plays like quad or something in that spot, QUOD. Like that'll happen sometimes. And when you're playing VUM, you're basically saying, I will incur that risk of plays like that because I think my upside in this very even game, right? Saint is losing by 2 points only going into this turn. So even if he makes a play somewhere else that scores 20 or so points, that's nowhere near enough of a comfortable lead to simply rest on, right? And play defensively. It's totally within the realm of possibility to play a really offensive gambit type play like this. Um,
and let's look at this position. Like Wait was just played. So you were talking about trying to figure out if you can get any information from your opponent's play. Wait is an interesting play. It seems like a play that might be setting an S up. It might be just maximizing the score, which we know that's what was going on in Ed's head.
mhm.
Um, but if you're thinking of a play like Vum, there are a couple things you need to think about. Do I know if my opponent kept an O? You don't ever know for sure. But if you're looking at a play like Wait, you're thinking, okay, it's possible if he had an O, he could play TOWY on the O1 spot. He could play something else. There seems to be some options that occur to you if you're thinking of the incomplete rack of Wait plus an O. So if your opponent didn't have an O when they played Wait, it's much more likely that they don't have an O after Wait because they're only drawing 4 tiles. Their rack isn't random. So you could think about that. You can also think about, well, they just set up a scoring spot. Maybe they're setting up their S. What should I do? Maybe I should set something up myself. Like this is a close game. We kind of need to help ourselves out. The other option, Todovsky, with Vum, I think is just Volgo and JO. So let's talk about the play of Volgo. What does it do? What do you think, Will?
Yeah, the main thing that Volgo accomplishes is it gets all of your least appealing tiles off of your rack immediately in one shot. So when you look at this rack that Saint is sort of having to struggle through, right? He's got GLM NOUV, UV, one of the worst two tile combinations, and even when you're playing VUM, right? If you're going to make that play, the leftover letters of LONG, it's nice to have that NG combination together. But even if you draw that I that you're hoping to increase the power of the N and G together, there's really no great place on the board to play a 7 letter ING bingo here. So your upside for that leave isn't even very good. So by playing Volgo, you just get all of those unappealing tiles off of your rack at once. You keep the M and the N. The M is actually kind of a nice scoring tile here. A lot of the time, you can get a really heavy overlap by putting your M on top of the Y of Zloty. If you draw, let's say, like an H or something like that, You can get a really heavy hitting play there. So basically, Volgo has the advantage of just getting you out from all of that clunk quickly and not really incurring any risk, any of those. I play Vum instead, and my opponent has an O. Volgo is a much smoother series of outcomes. There aren't really as polarized a situation. Does my opponent have an O or do they not? Volgo is much smoother in that regard. You keep the game moving at a very nice and smooth pace. You score 20, use all of your bad letters, and hope to pick some better stuff for next turn. Maybe the blank. As long as you can avoid that Q, there's definitely many pathways to victory after a play like Volgo too. What am I missing, Josh?
No, that's an amazing analysis. I agree with basically everything you said, and I think it's just following the same theme that we saw, starting with Nomoe. Is just like, okay, I'm gonna make a play that helps me. I don't really care too much about what my opponent might do. I'm just scoring. I'm just finding good plays. Um, there's no need to worry about the comebacks because look at this board. There's so many openings, so many possibilities. If I spend too much energy and sacrifice too many points trying to block things that might happen, well, I might just fall behind. So I think the idea again behind VUM is just help yourself out. Like it's just an individualist move, and there are times where that's the way to go, and there are times where that isn't the way to go. And you see some players struggling to figure out when those times are because it's so nuanced. Like who knows? This I think again, this is just a stylistic choice. It's like what are you really accomplishing by thinking about it too much? You can't really determine what's better. You can make all these assumptions, but at the end of the day, like VUM is so appealing. It's like, I set up my O really nicely and I have the NG combination. There are 6 E's remaining. I can draw one of those E's. I can maybe even draw an I and get a huge game-ending bingo. Um, so you're looking at what's remaining. You're looking at what you can draw. You see there's 6 E's, but there are also 5 R's. So another downside to playing more tiles is you might just draw multiple Rs. Um,
True,
as we
true.
were
Sorry,
mentioning,
Josh. I just want to
go
say
ahead.
that the round four pairings, I think we've resolved the technical
Oh,
difficulty.
awesome.
So I did cut back to the standings toward the end of
Cool.
your analysis. I apologize. But
No,
there
it's
was
fine.
so
Again, I
multiple
could
things
go
out
on and on.
there. Yeah, we really could.